victim of white supremacy. That's what it says. The textbook workbook for thought, speech, and or action, thinking, speaking, and acting, how victims should think, speak, and act, or people who call themselves victims or who think that they are victims or who have been called victims of racism. What to think about it, what to speak about it, what to do about it. And that last one is very important, what to do about it. Of course, speech is a form of doing too. And the word victim would mean that it would refer to the people who are victims of white supremacy, and those people would be classified by the white supremacists themselves as non-white people, people who are not white. You would have to be non-white in order to be a victim of a system of white supremacy. That's presupposing that there is such a thing as white supremacy. Now, that's the first thing people would have to agree on, or at least one person would agree on it with him or herself, that there is such a thing as racism. And that racism takes the form of something called the system of white supremacy. And if you have a system of white supremacy that is designed to mistreat, because that's what it would be for, to dominate and mistreat people who are classified as non-white, then presumably, logically speaking, the people who are subject to this system would be victims of the system, since white supremacy is racism, and racism is a crime. I use the term the same way it's traditionally always been used, possibly for thousands of years, that they are victims of a lot of things, a victim of a flood, a victim of this, a victim of that. So it comes down to, if I'm talking about a victim of something called racism, then the logical question is, does racism have victims? That's how you determine it. There's no other way to determine it. Does racism produce victims? Because if racism does not produce victims of racism, then I don't have a case. If racism has no victims.
Mm-hmm.
But if we have a thing called racism,
mm-hmm.
and racism is supposed to be an evil
mm-hmm.
against people,
mm-hmm.
then it comes down to what people, and are these people victims of a thing called racism? It's very simple. Sometimes you'll pick up the paper every day and you'll say the victim of a robbery. You know, why? Because they say, well, robbery is something that shouldn't happen. So a person who is robbed has been victimized.
Right.
Victim of a rape. You say, well, what is rape? Well, that's taking away somebody by force, usually something sexual in the modern way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And if a woman has been pulled into the grass and she against her will, and I mean her clothes taken off of her, and she's subject to sexual activities that she doesn't want to engage in, and that is called rape. Then she reports herself as having been raped, and she says, I'm a rape victim. She says that,
mm-hmm.
and hardly anybody has any problem with that. If you have an alternative system, then that would be valid according to logic. In other words, you have a equal choice that you can elect not to be a victim of racism, or you can be a victim of racism. But if you are in a system of racism that is completely worldwide, where are you going to go if you don't have the knowledge and expertise to go to another planet? Now, if you can just suddenly just say, well, I'm out of here, because I have a choice. I can go to the planet Krypton anytime I want to. I can catch an express and be there tomorrow, and I don't have to put up with this. Now, that's a different, and you choose to stay and be victimized, then that is your choice. But if you're on the planet Earth in 2012, you are in the system of white supremacy that is completely worldwide, and that system dominates all of your behavior because you have to react to it in every area of activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. You're a victim while you're in the system. And I'll make this analogy.
Okay.
If you're on a slave ship, you're born on a slave ship, and you somehow, during the voyage on the slave ship, you figure out that you're on a slave ship because you're born on the slave ship.
Mm-hmm.
It had nothing to do with that. This is where you are. Like being lost in the woods. You're born in the woods. You were abandoned in the woods. You find yourself in the woods when you were born. So you look around and you say, what is all of this? Are these trees? Are these rocks? Is that water over there? What is water? What is a tree? What are rocks? What is food? How do I eat? So you have to evolve as you go along. And you do this by looking around at your environment and figure out how things work. Cause and effect. Cause and effect. Water is wet. Fire will burn. You find out the difference between water and fire. So little by little, you're figuring out, hey, I'm not going to be victimized by being helpless all the time because I'm going to figure out what the difference between an apple and a rock.
Okay.
A rock is something I can build something with. An apple is something that I eat. A rock is not the same as an apple. So I have to figure these things out because nobody's telling me the things that I need to know. I'm alone on a planet. So whatever created the planet, I can call on, and a lot of religious people will understand that because that's all you got. And you call on someone to tell you things. And sometimes ideas come to you. Well, where were those ideas before you got them? But, you might not even bother to look at that.
Uh-huh.
But you can or cannot. But you do know that sometimes by looking at things, you figure out, quote, unquote, figure out the difference between a tree and the difference between a rose and a cucumber. And so you know the difference by trial and error. You make mistakes as you go along. That goes with the territory. Like a baby learning to walk. They don't know anything about walking, but they have an idea. So the baby gets up and stumbles, maybe cries a couple of times, but little by little they gain confidence. And also the confidence comes from knowledge and understanding of the mechanism called walking, the process of walking. It's the same way with the person who is victimized, born into a system where they are victimized before they're even born. And that's the non-white people on this planet, born into the system of white supremacy. We're victimized before we're even born. Now, the white supremacists will definitely say, oh, you're not a victim. You got choices. Well, a slave master on a slave ship can always tell a slave that, yeah, you got a choice. If I turn you loose on the deck, you can jump overboard and drown. Or maybe you can just remain a slave and do what I tell you to do. Or maybe you can remain a slave and reach a point where you don't do what I tell you to do. So you don't have a lot of options here. So you work with the options that you have. Absolutely. And one thing that the white supremacists will do is tell you that you are not a victim. Oh, yeah, they'll say, oh, you're not a victim, you're a passenger. What's wrong with you? Are you sick? Yes, there either is or there is not a system of white supremacy that dominates the non-white people of this planet. That either is or is not. That's either true or false.
All right.
If it's false, everything that I'm saying does not apply.